Chapter 62 Bards of the Songbird. The songbirds made it a point to show hospitality to all, but no one had any idea how she got the genius wonder-child of Thanatos to show up. They had tea and snacks ready, although had they known Florengale herself had been coming, they might have made sure more staff of Songbird were ready for her. She was there to see Jacqueline, leaving all to wonder in wild bewilderment as to what she have done. Did she ever meet Florengale? She must have, because here she was. Florengale entered with 2 guards heavily armored and very quiet. Jacqueline was waiting in her office, writing up a storm using 2 hands to write on different pages. If that wasn't enough, she was using spells to keep pens afloat and writing on different documents. She stopped writing long enough to see Isla Goust herself. She buttoned up her shirt while she was turning away, then turned back to greet her guests. "This place is completely private. You may speak plainly." Florengale did not drop the act. "I was just updated on the situation by an associate of mine. He suggested I come here. I often honor advice of my subordinates." Jacqueline supposed she shouldn't expect her to drop the act ever. After all, her part was her life, and it's not as if she fully had their trust. She put on her specs and got up to look over Florengale. She was young and pretty, yes. She was an ideal mascot, and from what she could tell, a genuine healer to boot. She even made it look like she might be the one who could come up with the cure for the dark dust poisoning. Her answers were practiced constantly, and Jacqueline finished warm-up questions quickly. It did not escape her that Darius was standing quietly behind her as one of the 2 guards. Jacqueline smiled at him as he kept a disinterested expression. "What can you tell me about the stories of the Battle of Brushbog?" Florengale did not need to go that far. "I was hoping we could arrange something where you might make up the details. We can offer you facts, details of the battle, the enemies, and the witches my men faced. We can even give you interviews with the soldiers, possibly even Augustana. However, why should your house be selected over others? Based on the facts you were given so far, what story would you put together?" Jacqueline was being tested? Well, she supposed she could rise to the challenge one more time. Jacqueline spun a tale starting with the cruel behavior of the witches, using references from the refugees and even the Druid's testimony as sources. One part she left out rather on purpose were the dead animals and masks left behind as warnings by the witches. After all, she didn't want any blame on the people. She focused instead on the sudden attack. She described murders and people being eaten alive. Of course, she made it sound pretty, annoyingly so. She even told little stories of a little girl who was killed by a witch, her doll stolen and filled with her own heart. Darius knew which witch did that, but he didn't know that Abigail used another little girl's dolls. It made sense that she would steal hearts from victims, but he couldn't tell if Jacqueline was making this up. It was a perfect demonstration of how well she could present something as fact that couldn't be verified. They legitimately had Abigail, and they didn't know if she did anything like that. Then she talked about how the 12 houses took quick action, gathering old war heroes and members of their own houses to face the threat immediately. She smiled at Darius, clearly leaving out the part Darius met them before it happened. She then talked about how Thanatos led the charge and sent a very small number of forces to scout the situation. Laredo Meredith entered a guild party who readied themselves to test the threat. She told how he quickly struck down a small number of witch forces that caught many from surprise. She looked like she wanted details, but made use without them. She spoke of undead that struck the town and how forces seemed to cross the river. Hunters joined them a little before a large attack. Their names have been struck for privacy. The truth was Jacqueline didn't know them, but she did know undead and witch spawn were dead based on the bodies. She knew the elves of the Moon Court sent a few agents. They assisted the wounded with the help of the hunters. They held back witches who attempted to corrupt the river. She told a made-up story of how they stayed up in trees and waited for hours, striking down witches from a distance, using impressive-sized iron bolts. That was enough to get the point across. Florengale looked back to Darius. He nodded to her with approval. "You have skill. Would you be willing to work where you can interview soldiers who were there at the battle? If you wish it, we can even arrange a meeting between the captured witches." Jacqueline got wide-eyed and smiled even wider. "You captured witches? Nobody told me anything about that." Florengale continued, "We further would like you to be introduced to the Witchblades as well as the Commander Augustana. Of course, in return, we'd like to look over the story you are intending to print for all to read. I can have it written where you have exclusive first right to all stories that involve Thanatos." Florengale let Darius step forward. Whisper something into her ear, and she nodded. "We will have to go soon. With your permission, I will allow you to speak in private to a member of my security. He would like to fill you in on some of the details to add credibility to your story so far." Darius stepped forward. "A pleasure to meet you." Jacqueline eyed both of them. Well, if nothing else, they never dropped their act. But she supposed this was a test. The test being never drop the act. Never assume that you weren't being watched. Jacqueline knew this office was safe to talk in, but no one else did. Nor could they simply take her word for it. They had to constantly keep their guard up, as should she. "A pleasure. I thank you for your service, sir. What shall I call you?" Jacqueline played along well enough, she supposed, although it seemed silly. Darius gave her a quick shake of the hand and began explaining parts she missed. When the hunters arrived, their names and fighting style. He told them of Meredith and could, if he was willing, get an interview with the war hero. He spoke of the work Laredo Meredith did at Blackmaw. He spoke too of Augustana and Scipio, but most of the credit he gave to the leading forces to Augustana and Meredith, although he wasn't sure if he'd want the attention. He told him how they worked with the witch hunters, how the basics of the attack went, how command of one of the forces was given to the Mooncourt elf, which surprised Jacqueline, but she kept adding notes as he spoke. When it came to the obvious blank spots, he would often ask what she would say to fill in the gaps. She got it, of course. Whatever she made up is what they go with. The 12 houses had an easy way to pursue, and they took it. The elves offered command a path to the bog, and they took it, braving magic to do it. She got the details of how they traveled, and did guesswork on the magic they were using. She even figured out that the sun and Mooncourt must have worked together to make this all work out. Darius told her about the bog, about the brave stand Augustana put up, making sound more and more like an actual battle instead of sneaking up behind witches and cheaply killing them before they could defend themselves. He gave her much more details, and it was obvious that he simply wouldn't tell her the parts he didn't want her to write, letting her guesswork be supported. What was interesting is that if she guessed right, he might let her still write it. If it was obvious enough that she'd guess it, then there was no point in hiding it. For example, Thanatos provided new weaponry that allowed for easier slaying of witches. Darius supposed hiding that was impossible. Only to a select few, but yes. She guessed again. Some type of cold iron and enchanted metal. Darius didn't give her specifics. The exact amounts of metal and enchantment are a secret, but you aren't far off, he lied. She didn't catch it, she just kept writing, or rather she didn't bother to press the issue. She had a good thing going, and she wasn't about to ruin it. She was going to get her paper done first. She was getting the story before the men even came back. They were marching back, and she was going to have the whole story open itself up, completely ready and willing for her. Darius actually made good time keeping to the parts she needed to know and adding clarity to things that sounded like she was missing. The abilities of the witches were particularly interesting to her. The motivation as well, as Darius wasn't the only one she could ask. To think she could interview an actual witch. Florengale approached and respectfully interrupted them. "Apologies, but I am needed elsewhere, and I dare not walk the streets unguarded. Please meet with us again. We will see what can be arranged as far as an interview with the soldiers. Please be respectful, as they might be tired or in need of healing." Of course she'd play ball. Everyone else was going to have to interview injured soldiers who did not have the testimony of those who were able to see the entire battle. Certainly she had access to the celebrities of the battle, giving the songbirds the truest voice to resound through the streets of Shing. Oh yes, this alliance would do. She needed to work up the paperwork first, but for now she was happy. Florengale also made it clear what would be on the table. We will give you exclusive first look into our stories, and I will, if you wish, arrange for paperwork to be arranged to solidify that bargain. How soon would you want it? Jacqueline didn't see why to waste time. Right now, if possible. Florengale looked to Darius. "Seems you were right. Bring them in." Legal aides arrived a little less than half an hour ago. They brought in documents that only required signing and witnesses. The documents were official, but purposefully written in such a way where Thanatos could always read what they wrote before they published it, or made it public where harsh consequences could be imparted. Jacqueline read it over, understood most of it, and agreed. "On behalf of the House of Songbird, I sign. I, Jacqueline Darcy, agree to your terms." Florengale nodded to her and was done. "We shall get you those interviews. Please send it through private channels as best you can. I will not be reading it myself, but I will always make sure somebody that represents us can be here to look over the work when necessary." Also, at the parade tomorrow, we intend to make a public announcement. Please be there. You'll be the one interviewed. More? Jacqueline already had so much on her plate, but then she realized this is exactly what she needed, what she asked for. What kind of announcement? Chapter 63. Legends Call. The march was at last coming to an end. Augustana was tired of this nonsense. It's true she did a lot, but it was something that didn't sit right with her. Meredith and Scipio handled it better than she did. Meredith kept playing down what they did, and Scipio mostly just described details that would send storytellers elsewhere, usually naming something amazing someone else did. Scipio was a master of deflection. Augustana was the center of the elves' questions, given a seat near the court tables, and she personally had to tell her story. They seemed to relish every detail she gave them about striking down a witch, or ending the witch spawn with the power of the light. To them it was a legend made true, and they drank in every bit of exaggeration the other men fed them. Augustana sighed and supposed the feast was wonderful enough to at least justify all the questions and attention she was getting. What's worse is she feared she would get more in Xing. She just sort of became a folk hero. Even after it was time to sleep well and she had trouble keeping the attention at bay. Was this really what she wanted? She didn't ask to get this kind of attention, but then she supposed considering the job she took, this was to be expected. She wanted to complain about it, but couldn't. Instead, after she got some peace, she promised just to get some sleep and prayer. Make her way to Xing tomorrow and be done with this. She did suppose there were all sorts of duties and jobs needed of her at back home. The trip was kept somewhat tame by Meredith and Scipio keeping her company. At last she asked the question, "Do recent events seem strange?" Scipio didn't know what she meant. How so? She shook her head. It seems like things have changed since Black Maw. Things are changing for the better, yet I still feel worried. Meredith shrugged. Nothing's really changed that much. I mean, the opponent changed. Darius is still keeping his planning to himself. We follow his orders and things run all right. What's different? Scipio had a guess. Maybe it's what you heard in Black Maw, or maybe it's something a witch said to you before death. Your death curse. What was it? Augustana didn't want to talk about it. How could she? Yes, both of those things are on my mind. But if we really were able to make a difference, how much of one did we make? Meredith let his new druid cuddle him as he spoke. Well, I guess we'll have to find that out later. Numbers need to be crunched and all. Scipio reminded him. Remember, anyone could be using magic to listen to us. It is better we do not say too much. Let us see if we can make it through the parade just fine. Augustana and Meredith both groaned. There's a parade? They said in unison. Scipio wondered what about that surprised them. Considering the circumstances, it's better we stay together and be vague. It's better to smile and wave. Act tired and dismiss yourselves from any speeches. Augustana knew it would be another round of retelling the story. Luckily, she had plenty of practice at least. Entering the capital of Xing was met with booming sounds, cheers, and magical illusions to make it seem like petals of flowers were raining from the sky. The 12 house banners were littered through the city walls. Many people held up banners of the 12 houses like fans of a team. Generally, it was the houses that provide the most troops. Music played, and they entered the city like heroes. Meredith held a very, very frightened druid, who looked around with panic as he tried to calm her. Scipio just stood up and waved. "Where was this on our way back from Black Maw?" Scipio said, looking around at the sight. "You'd think they'd have a portion of this excitement for ending a war. But then, this ended better, he supposed." The cheering and lights continued. Flares shot up in the air, mostly cheap fireworks enhanced with magic. The boom must have deafened those who were too close. It was loud enough as it was with all the people. Spirits rose a little when they could see people from the town who lost their homes. Men who lost their wives and children. They saw children who lost their parents. There were injured men and women who still somehow made it to the parade. The shame of saying she wasn't a hero slowly started to brush away. There were men and women who wanted vengeance, and rightly so. Sure, they might not have their families back, but they could at least have solace in the fact those who murdered them would murder no more. The druid, Iflana, even began to poke her head out and look at those who were hurt by the witches. She recognized them and didn't see any of her old party. She looked to Meredith, who had to guess what she meant to say at a glance. "You were with the druids from before, right? Do you see any of them?" She shook her head. It seems she did not. Up ahead, they made their stop at a rather large building where reps from the 12 houses waited to congratulate them as they walked by. They might have wondered what the hell was going on when Florengale stepped up to a podium before a crowd, Darius walking silently behind her. The city of Xing expresses its thanks to returning heroes. On behalf of my company and the 12 noble houses, I thank you for the work you have done. Few can know what you had to do. For my part, I offer reparations to the fallen. Those who died will have their families cared for, the town rebuilt, and land given back to those it belongs. Further, I'd like to announce the beginnings of a new organization, one devoted entirely to healing. A facility that heals all and focuses on repairing damage to the world and all that live in it. I announce the beginning of a new branch, the Ministry, a new organization that will set the stage for cities around the world to repair the damage done by disasters and the evil throughout the world. The Ministry? What the hell was that? Some new charity group? Florengale waited for a small pause in the noise before speaking. Know that we shall start with what is right in front of us. We of the Ministry will stand and ensure these men and women get their homes back. We restore their health and heal the earth of the corruption left behind by the witches. We plan to get to work immediately. Those who would join me, please speak to a guild or house assembly, or simply walk to me as we can make certain the fallen soldiers are cared for. Thank you. She simply got off stage and began to make her way past the crowd with several guards following as she made her way to the families, shifting the focus from the heroes to the fallen. Meredith silently thanked whoever thought that up. He could use a little less attention. Augustana noted that Darius did not follow her. He approached while another speaker took the stage, and a lot of attention was on Florengale. If you want to avoid being cheered at and interviewed, come with me. They all did. They were already tired of it. He led them into the officious building behind the podium and out a back door, hoping not too many people would notice. Much to their surprise, they were being followed. Meredith stopped and noticed who was following them after making it out the back door. It was Sai. Wait! Sai, what was he doing here? Darius and Augustana were about to dismiss him until Meredith stepped up for him. He's trustworthy. Wherever we're going, he can at least come. Scipio and Augustana looked to Darius, who only continued to walk without protest. Scipio shrugged and said, We were planning a time to meet again. Probably take a trip to a few places, just so you know. Darius spoke as they walked. I'm sure you all realize there's still a major threat unchecked. I wasn't planning on the boy being here for this conversation, but I suppose I'll ask you now. Sai was your name, was it? You've proven useful. Would you be willing to work for us? I can offer you a job. Sai had to ask, what did you have in mind? I mean, what's the job? Meredith took a guess, looking right at Darius. He was half asking a question, half explaining it to Sai. You're going to try to make the world as long as you can, aren't you? Scipio nodded. Makes sense. That's what this is about, right? The witches? Darius nodded. For the most part, yes, and the weapons I gave you are also to that purpose. I would have you join me on a journey in the coming days. I would have you journey with me to a special site where we can observe the possibility of killing Hikatai as well as see our progress. We need to have a way to summon her. If we can do that, then at least it would be worth considering going up against her. Augustana got wide-eyed. Did he mean it? Darius never boasted about such things. Did he really have a way to kill a goddess? Or did he mean to bargain with her? You have a plan? Meredith shrugged. Probably not much of one. We're going back there, aren't we? He didn't name the place, but everyone knew what he meant. Darius nodded, making certain not to mention names of places such as the observatory or Blackmaw. You trust this boy? He asked Meredith, looking at him coldly. Rather than making him say it again, he simply acknowledged his facial expression. Sai looked around. Well, you guys have managed to do in 2 weeks what would have been impossible in 2 years. You guys want to help the world? I'm in. I'll help. When do you want to travel? Augustana explained. We need to let things die down here first. Then we need to go to a faraway place. We can't say where, but it will take days to get back home. Scipio calmed Sai a bit as he looked a bit nervous. It'll make sense what we're doing when we get there. I can't say where. Some of what we must do must be secret. Xing has many ears and eyes. Best not to test if they're interested. Sai wondered, is it really okay for me to be going with you? Meredith was sure. Oh, it's fine. I'm not really sure any of us were qualified from the start. We just happened to be the ones that the news came to. Still, you'll want a bag and something to take notes. Be sure to travel light." Darius began, "1 week's time from now, meet me at the Gauss estate. I'll have a carriage ready. I intend to look into what can be done about Haikatai. 1 week from then they would travel to Blackmaw. They would go to the observatory and see what could be done."